Here's a simple test to know if you lived your life with lust. At your death, people laugh a lot. I want to talk about my Uncle James because at his funeral, it was like a comedy convention. There's laughter all over the room, and it's meaningful who this man was. My Uncle James was a bear of a man. He was just huge, and he ate like crazy. We'd be driving, he'd say, hey, there's an all-you-can-eat mussel shop, right? We'd sit there for hours and talk and laugh. He had this deep voice, but when he laughed, it went the whole range of the piano, right? It started deep, and it was this high-pitched howl by the end of it. It was hilarious. And he laughed so much because he told a lot of jokes. He told a lot of dirty jokes, right? He told a lot of religious jokes. And if they were dirty religious jokes, they scored huge points on his radar. He loved them, right? And here's probably something that's really important to tell you at this point. My uncle was a priest, right? Great guy. Always wanted to be a priest. My aunt told me this story at his funeral. When he was 10, my grandmother had just ironed the curtains and hung them on the house in West Philadelphia, and she walked away. She came back 10 minutes later. He had taken them down to make some vestments for himself, and he was holding a makeshift mast for all the kids in the neighborhood with grape juice and crackers, right? My grandfather was a disciplinarian in the house. My aunt was telling me this story, and when he got home, my grandmother said, this is what happened, punish him. And my grandfather said, oh, what can you do with that, right? At 14, my Uncle James was in the seminary, and his reputation was he was a genius. He was a really smart man. He was a faithful man. He was a really passionate man. And he was a practical joker like they had never seen before. And at his funeral, a lot of these stories came out. I'm just going to tell one because it's one of the funniest ones of all. I've heard him tell it, but after he was gone, to hear the other priests from his order, most I didn't know, tell the same story over and over, I knew he wasn't just making up all the stories he told me over the years, so it added an extra point to it. But there was an older priest in the order who complained about a particular duty they had to do once they rotated it. But every Saturday, one of the priests had to go across a highway to where there's a convent and hear the confessions of the nuns. And this old priest said, come on, it's a waste of our time, you know. On Tuesday, I forgot to say the Angelus. On Thursday, I ate a piece of candy, and I could have given that money to the poor. He could have written it in. He knew that, right? So this old guy was complaining. My Uncle James, either because he wanted to teach him a lesson about the sacrament or because he was a smart ass, probably the latter, came up with a plot. And the next time this particular priest was doing confessions at the convent, my uncle waited until he was there, snuck over. He didn't tell me how he did this part, but he got himself a full nun's habit, complete with the headpiece and the wimple, right? And he went into the confessional, he waited his turn, and he got in there, and in his best falsetto, and here I quote him, I confessed a litany of sins that would make the great Satan blush, right? He received a very harsh penance that day, and he went back to where he lived, and that night at dinner, he asked the old priest, he said, how was confessions today? And the old priest gave him a stern lecture on the importance of privacy of the confessional. So he knew the priest did not figure out that it was actually him doing it. But that was my uncle. He was a practical joker as much as he was a passionate man. My uncle was a parish priest in Mississippi in the 60s. And my grandmother, who was very proud to have a son who was a priest and had gotten over the curtains and the grape juice and the crackers, was very upset to find out that her son, the priest, was getting arrested all the time for civil disobedience, right? My uncle was passionate about people. He loved them, and he knew what was going on there was wrong, and he wanted to do right. So he had this dichotomy going. He was always making jokes, most of them not proper, but he was this faithful, amazing man that you'd love to be around, and this howling laugh that went on with him. I once asked him that day we were eating all the mussels in the restaurant. I asked him, I said, how do you do that, both of those things? And he didn't hesitate. He quoted St. Teresa of Avila. He said, Peter, a sad saint is a sad saint, right? So he taught me that lesson. I'm going to end with a story that ties it all together in terms of how do you keep those two things going, right? And it's not a story about my Uncle James, but it became about him over time. It's a story about my Aunt Peggy, who was a nun, my dad's sister, my dad's brother, both religious lives, right? And at her 25th Jubilee as a nun, my Uncle James flew in for the Jubilee Mass, and it was a great celebration for my aunt. And he was con-celebrating. He was up on the altar, but he was not doing the homily. There was a priest who my aunt worked at his parish for years and years who was going to do this homily. And beautiful Mass. beautiful man, this priest who's doing the homily. Straight off the boat from Italy, and that's only important because he had a really heavy accent. And that's important to the story. Because when he was talking, he built up his whole homily towards a gift he wanted to give Aunt Peggy. And because we had heard him speak so much, we'd acclimated to the accent. We knew that the gift he wanted to give her was really the gift of peace. But it came out like this. Sister Margaret, piss be on you. And we were good Catholics, the whole family, and we know the only time you laugh in church is if the priest thinks he's funny, right? So we stone-faced and we did not do anything. And it would have been done right there if the nice little Italian priest didn't embellish a little. And he said, my wish for you is that piss always rains down upon you. And we're doing our best to hold it together because we know that's our job, and we're only thinking of ourselves, and you don't want to be the one who laughs out loud, and all the aunts and uncles are there, and the cousins are there, and all her friends are there, and the other nuns of the order, and we're all trying to keep our straight face. And the nice little Italian priest says, and not just you. Piss be on your whole family. And at that point, you'd see some of the uncles getting their hackles up, right? The shoulders going like, what did he just say? Right? And we're all keeping our straight faces. And then he decides to name everyone in the family he knows, too. And he said, piss be on your brother James, who flew in for this very occasion. And for the first time, we thought we ought to look at Uncle James, this practical joker. And he's behind the priest who's telling him, and he is shaking hysterically. And he's red in the face, and he's got tears coming out the side of his eyes, but he is not going to laugh, right? But now all our attention's on him, because we're just waiting for it to happen, right? And this nice little priest goes through every relative that he knows by name and urinates on all of them to hear my uncle tell the story, right? And he's going, and we're all just watching and trying to hold it together. We're watching Uncle James, and I'm looking at the marble in this place thinking, man, when he starts howling, it's really going to be loud in here. And he's holding it together, and there's this long pause, and you think he's done this part of his homily, and we're going to get through this. And after the long pause, he says, and Sister Margaret, your parents, may they rest in piss. And to Uncle James's credit, and we all followed his lead, he held it together even through that. So I learned from him, and especially on that day, that some things are more important than the quick joke, right? And many times through the years, that story's been told again and again, often by him. And at his funeral, there was the same kind of laughter the night before, the day of, everyone telling these kind of stories. So I just want to end by saying, Uncle James, may you rest in piss. Thank you.